Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being in here. We appreciate the competition with the keynote over in that room. In case you didn't realize, this is the true keynote for the show. So we know that y'all will be the most motivated attendees at the show this week. Welcome to our presentation, Life on the Edge, Profiles as Professional Transitions, Edge Protections and Finishes. We did try to find a shorter way to say that, but really we just wanted to get that Life on the Edge part in there. That was the important part. My name is Joseph Matisse. I am a territory manager with Schluter Systems. I work in the western half of the Carolinas, so I cover Greenville, South Carolina, Charlotte, Asheville, pretty much that whole western section of the Carolinas. I'm a certified tile installer, a number 1155. I sit on the NTCA technical committee. I worked with the ANSI A108T committee. I show up at TCNA handbook committee meetings and I annoy people with questions. And all of that really just to say that I'm a big nerd about it. I have 17 years of tile installation experience. And a lot of people look at me and they'll say that doesn't look right, but that's because I'm Asian. So I'm going to look like this until I'm about 60. Then I'm going to look old. So I've been with Schluter Systems for about a year and a half now, and they've been very gracious to allow me to wear orange ties when I show up to these professional events.
My name is Jim Harrington. I am the Director of Technical Services for Schluter. I am a recovering tile installer. Started back in the 80s, so do the math. I work for professional consultants, Rich Goldberg. If any of you guys have ever read the handbook, you'll see his name in there. Worked for him for 10 years, and I was lucky enough to have Schluter contact me and ask to become part of their team.
So one thing I'll mention.
I'm 21. I'm Irish. That's why I look so old.
One thing I do want to mention, I have really bad allergies this week, and I will be hacking and coughing, and I'm really sorry, and I'm going to try and keep it out of the microphone as much as possible, so please bear with me. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. That's not redundant at all. First thing we're going to talk about is what are profiles, why use them, the features, the benefits, the functions. We're going to talk about those best practices, and we're going to talk about setting the standard. So really, we're going to be covering the what, the why, the where, the how, which is what a lot of contractors need to know, but also we're going to talk about what's coming in the future. So it's a lot of exciting information. We do have some time set aside at the end for some questions, but if you've got a burning question rising up inside of you, feel free to shout it out. We're always happy to get a little bit of distraction up here.
And heckling.
And a little heckling. We already have a designated heckler table. So,
two of them.
So that first question, what? What are profiles? In the simplest terms, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot, I'm a little behind on this one. In the simplest terms, profiles are pieces of metal or pieces of plastic, and they're designed to protect your tile edges. They're designed to give you a nice aesthetic value. And in reality, they replace almost every circumstance where you would put tile trim. And you can see some great pictures that we've got there of just a variety of different installations and opportunities where you would go, including just transitioning between different surfaces along that same plane. It's a pretty simple one, the what they are. The why, and this also covers the where, honestly, that's a little bit more, involved. Why use profiles? Well, I think that we've all seen stuff like this, whether we've got an installation background, a design background, a technical background, whether we're builders, whatever it is that we're interested in and why we're here. A lot of times we'll be going around and we'll see these things. In fact, one of the things, actually I forgot to mention when we were talking about profiles in the beginning, just so y'all know, I'll give you a quick brief history, or we will give you a quick brief history of profiles in general. Back in 1975, Mr. Schluter, who was a tile contractor.
Werner
right?
Schluter, tile master extraordinaire.
Yep.
He had himself a few challenges, how to finish off the front edge of floor tile, so he went into his garage and created something. Just made it and solved a problem. And that's really kind of what we do, right? We try and solve problems for customers. It was so well appreciated that his started making them for friends, and next thing you know, he stopped setting tile and started manufacturing products, and the rest is history.
Yeah. He just had so many issues with these edges coming damaged, they'd get chipped, whatever it was. And that's honestly what we see in this very first picture here, up on the top. I'm sure this is something we've all seen. This could be in somebody's house, this could be in somebody's hotel, whatever it is. It's just nasty, it's unsightly, it's ruined the life cycle of that. I've seen this 100,000 times if I've seen it once, I'd say.
Yeah, it's a steady, constant problem. I think we've all seen that in one degree or another. If you've ever done a renovation, or if you're like our families that walk around with the kids going, "Hey, Dad, did you see that?" You know, I mean, it's around our everyday life.
I don't judge tile work as I walk around. What are you talking about?
Sure you do. You can't stand in a men's room without looking
That
at the
is
grout
true.
joints.
I was actually in the bathroom at my hotel, and I was like, I know what grout this is. I know exactly what brand it is.
I knew my kids were my kids when at 8 years old they came up and said, "You should have seen the bathroom in there. It was just horrible. You would never do that, Dad."
That's just one example. This second one there, that's pretty interesting to me. These tripping hazards, you know, you can look at that as a stair. That was probably something that was a little overlapped anyways. What you can do with wood, you want that little reveal, but when it comes to tile, obviously it's a completely different material. It's got different challenges, and this might have happened. Maybe somebody was rolling up a cart up the stairs with the supplies and it broke it off. And you gotta think about that. That's a tripping hazard going up and going down. If you're going up and you're expecting to hit the stair at the right height and you get that little extra half inch of that tile, you might stumble, but worse is you're carrying a box down the stairs, you're expecting that full depth of the stair for you to step down on, and all of a sudden, 2-3 inches of it are broken off, and all of a sudden, you might be tumbling down, like I just almost did. Not something that we want to be seeing, right? What about this other one over here on the side with those chipped corners, Jim?
Yeah, you know, I mean, we all have done that in our careers. Anyone that's installed tile, right? You just bullnose or miter that corner and you don't really think about it. But something like that could occur even in a residential application, somebody banging garbage cans on it or a mover moving something through your house. It's a pretty typical problem if you wanted ceramic base, which is a nice finish.
Yeah, or if you're a little bougie like me, you've got one of those nice metal trash cans in the bathroom, you move it to one side, tunk, and if it's not protected, unfortunately, you might be causing some damage. Even other things, though, like you've got loss aesthetic, where along that bottom one where that grout has separated along that cove, it's difficult to clean.
A lot of times you're following code, right? They want the base to sit on the floor and then the tile to abut it. That joint is a lot of maintenance. Either it cracks out or maybe you actually had put sealant in it, but the sealant fails at some point. I mean, these are all real world things that people have to deal with on a daily basis, and it gets expensive. I mean, once something's in service, do you really want to come in and go through that process? People don't want to go through that expense to clean and maintain and all of that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And even that vertical one, you know, that shouldn't have been that way in the first place. Obviously, it should have been a soft joint, but now it's a crack. Now it has to be something that's maintained. And let's be honest, these sort of coves and transitions and all those bottom pictures, those are all things that we see usually in situations like bathrooms and whatnot. And honestly, if you look at all of these different pictures, what's interesting is that all of these problems and all of these challenges, they're independent of tile size or tile trends, which means that these problems were present back in the 70s when profiles were invented. They're still prevalent today in 2025, 50 years later, 2024. I'm not in the future yet.
That's a great point.
But honestly, if you look at those bottom ones, anybody with any sort of installation background, I guarantee you can smell that picture and it's kind of gross. So that's the why and the where. Let's talk about, here's a little bit more going into these features and benefits. Jim?
Yeah, and I don't see a lot of people my age in the room here. When I started setting tile, this was something that every helper started learning and memorizing, all the little part numbers. I see Dan Marvin over here nodding his head. He worked for manufacturers. And you were supposed to remember every single one of these things, but what always happened? The guy would order them, they'd miss parts, right? Your estimator would miss the parts. Maybe they would catch all the little parts and pieces, but they didn't come in. So it's like, all right, where do I put the inside corner? Where do I leave it out? Builders are upset because their job isn't complete, or just as likely it's going to be a different die lot. I don't know how many of the younger guys in here realize that, right? They would do a run of field tile and bullnose and all the parts and pieces, and the field tile would disappear, but they would still have all those parts and pieces, and they would make another run of field tile, another run of field tile, and pretty soon they almost look like different colors. And that was a common practice. You could even see it in older installations today if you look around. That's why the cap is a different color than the corner, and the corner is a different color than the tile. It wasn't a decorative choice, it was reality.
It was just the way things were, right?
And they were expensive.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's important to point that out. It wasn't just expensive to purchase; they're expensive to produce. They're specialty shapes, especially some of these really weird ones, like those inside corner mud caps. It's got a 90. It's got a little cove that curves in. It's supposed to go a certain depth over all that, and then that's difficult to ship too because they're fragile, right? So all that's extra cost, extra time, extra challenges, and if you look at these charts, obviously this is. And I think these guys will attest, these are not comprehensive charts for what all were available.
It was hard to find some of the real charts. Again, I see Mr. Marvin over here nodding his head. The charts were very complex. I was looking actually for the one with just a flat bullnose. We couldn't find it online. But those were all the little parts. Dan, you can probably spit numbers out still. Yeah, and it's why I became a mechanic, is because I couldn't memorize them. I could yell at my helper to learn all that stuff.
The other thing to point out here with all these old tile trim pieces is that when these were prevalent, tile was 4x4. That's just what it was, except when you got into large format tile.
We had some really big 6x6s,
6x6s, and then what was a true large format?
Man, the first 10x10s. Does anyone remember the first 10-inch tiles? I see this young lady, your grandfather must have showed you when you were a toddler. I actually had a 10-inch superior cutter, and I had a tile that was 10 inches exactly. The 10-inch superior cutter, by the way, is, I believe, 9 15/16, because I had to cut everything on the wet saw, and the next day I was out buying my first double rail cutter, which was not available at Home Depot, because Home Depot was like a little store in California or somewhere. It certainly wasn't in Connecticut where I came up.
Yeah, so whole different world. And also, all of those bits and pieces that you see, those are all for wall tile. Really, the only thing that was available for floor tile for transitions, carpet metals, maybe a marble threshold.
Yeah, carpet metals, the old top metal, right? That's what everybody put in. It was a top metal. It was basically anything. It would, come in after the fact, generally covering up chip tiles, right? Because that's open traffic, before the transition piece is in. And if it's over concrete, like so much of our work is, it wasn't just a simple matter of nailing it in, but you had to drill it, dowel it, and then nail it in, and it forever going back. Why? Because, that end of it came loose or something got caught in it. And if it was exposed, typically you're cutting it with what? Just a pair of snips, and the end's all twisted and different color and whatnot. So,
not ideal is the overall situation. Now,
I just was reliving all the complaints in my head.
Now, fast forward to what we're talking about today, profiles. This is really where it starts to shine. Profiles not only replace all those trims that we were just looking at, but it's a huge difference in these pictures from the slide that we showed before of why we were going to use them, all those broken edges, cracked grout. Just this one up here in the top left, and I'm sorry I'm only pointing at this screen because I don't want to accidentally hit Jim in the eye. This one, we've got a nice little tub deck. We've got 3 dimensions coming together, and it's all clean, it's all protected, but it looks nice, too. Or even just moving into other transitions, like you've got this one down here, it's a ramp moving down to a lower piece of flooring. We all know that when you prep tile right, chances are you're gonna be a little higher than your other floor coverings, right?
Good chance of it, unless there was some real planning going on. If there's a renovation going on,
yeah,
it gets really expensive to make all of those transitions flush, right?
And especially as like the flooring in the rest of these houses and the rest of these buildings change, it's no longer, it might be, full carpet, and it might not be 3/4 inch wood. Now we're meeting up to 2mm LVP or 6mm floating LVP, low pile carpet, all that stuff.
I think that's true even in applications that are commercial, Joseph, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we're kind of like hitting everything residential, but in the commercial world, I think there's an element of truth to everything that we're talking about as well.
I agree. Now this one down here in the bottom left, I like this one because it's like the perfect counterpoint to the first one that we looked at in the other slide with all those busted edges. It's carpet meeting up to tile, but we don't see any of those issues, right? We don't see broken edges. It's got a nice clean appearance. This is something that as an owner, I'd be happy to sign off on and accept. And planning and preparation took care of this. We also talked about tile size and tile format before, 4x4, maybe 6x6, every once in a while 10x10. This last picture there, I was looking at them, I was trying to do some, thumb math, and I'm guessing those are like 30x30 tiles flowing through that entire bathroom, running into the building elements, the benches, the walls, that shower, and all of it is tied together really beautifully, but we don't need to be specifying 4x4 little trim pieces to finish off the edges. We're able to integrate profiles in to give it a beautiful, unified, designed experience. Anything to add on that?
No, I think you nailed it.
Cool. Now, that was just for the edge protection, basically replacing what we saw on those charts before. But profiles can do more than that. We talked about features, benefits, and functions. These are actually very functional pieces that we can integrate into these tile assemblies. This top one up here shows, these top two, I should say, up here, really show two of the same things, but in different applications. Here's a profile that actually replaces a movement joint, a soft movement joint. And for those of you who don't know, in the TCNA handbook, it's the tile Bible, right? But kind of like the Bible, it's for a lot of people, it's voluntary as far as what you follow, with one exception in TCNA, which is EJ 171, which is all about movement. That's the only part in that whole book that's required. Now, typically it calls for a soft joint of silicone, but that's a maintenance item. That's something you have to go back, clean, replace periodically, and it's something that honestly a lot of times building owners don't want to be taking the time out of their schedules, closing their buildings to do that maintenance. Here's a profile that replaces that and replaces the maintenance. And that's just one of the possibilities that you got. Even in the changes of plane here in these three wall-to-floor and wall-to-wall transitions here, those are profiles, again, accomplishing that same effect, where they're taking the movement, they're taking over that point of view, and or not the point of that function, and they're replacing that maintenance item, and they look great, honestly. Let's see. These bottom two, though, we've got cove transitions. Where might we want to see cove transitions, Jim?
Yeah, the cove transitions, you might want to see them in a sanitary application or just for a decorative purpose. There's a couple of types. There's double leg with movement built within, and there's single leg where it drops down on top of it, similar to the certain types of sanitary base. I know we get requests for approvals and, a lot of restaurants and hotels, hospitals, all of that stuff. Sometimes it gets a little tricky, and we got to work with the customers to get approvals on the commercial side. But for the most part, they're going in everywhere.
Yeah, and these
replacing sanitary base.
Yeah, exactly. And these are the sort of things that, depending on who you get them from, who produces them, you might be able to get them in a variety of great colors. This is something that predominantly you see in commercial applications, like buildings like this or your hotels. But we're starting to see more of this pop up in residential applications because honestly, people
see them in showers a lot.
Yeah, people hate seeing that little joint at the bottom of their shower pan just get a little dirty. They don't want to have to get that one toothbrush for it, I'm actually going to be doing my bathroom in a couple months. I'm going to be putting this exact same sort of cove in my bathroom just because I personally really hate cleaning my shower, and that little joint is a particular bugaboo of mine. Please.
Exactly,
Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. You don't
Exactly.
caulk it, that's correct.
Exactly. So different ones have that functionality built in. Like I mentioned, these top two, these show, oh, whoops, wrong button.
Well, just let's back up just for a second. I mean, years ago when I started setting tile and we were gluing 4 1/4 on green board, you absolutely, you had to have a caulk sealant in there, right? Because it needed to be waterproof. We've evolved past that, and for the most part, companies are selling topical waterproofing. You're waterproofing the walls before it goes in. We have the technology to do it. We've realized that, it's much more sanitary and effective to go that route. So if you're concerned about that water getting past it, then water's going to get past your grout joints no matter what. That's why we waterproof behind it. When you put that particular profile and that style of profile, you're abutting it. So it's actually, you're kind of pressing it in there a little bit. But that'll prevent, aside from the aesthetics and not having to replace it, it will prevent the helper from going in. I mean, how many guys are installers here? How many of them go and do the recaulk? You know what? You send the new guy in, and he goes in with his razor knife and he slashes the bleep out of it. And now what has he done? He's just not only has he cut that caulk up, but he's also cut your waterproofing up. And working in the technical department, I promise you that's a complaint that we get all the time. So by doing this, you're really kind of saving your customer from that future problem, which could be 10, 15 years down the road, the life of the shower.
Yeah. And the other thing too is some of these coves and transitions, some of them are designed to handle movement, again, depending on which one you choose and which company you get it from. But even the ones that don't have that built in, it's really easy to use one of those other ones that we have up top there to integrate that movement further into the assembly, because it's all cumulative, so it doesn't necessarily have to be at the edge. So you can still have all these same maintenance-free options, corners, coves, in the field, and still have it be maintenance-free and still fitting with that requirement of accommodating movement in your tile assembly. So huge solutions, honestly. There's no other way to say it.
And the aesthetics, I want to keep hammering on that, because that's ultimately we're trying to design these beautiful, beautiful showers, and people are spending a lot of money on it. And I mean, who's ever seen a really nice silicone joint in a residential application?
That's true. I don't think I've ever been in there like, man, look at that silicone. It looks perfect.
I mean, we always recommended, back in the day, you'd recommend using, something that, at least a sealant that you could clean with your fingers, but now you're going in there every 2 years maybe, in order to make it function.
Did I answer your question? All right, perfect, great. Now, I really like this slide because it's very optimistic. I love that sentence. Profiles provide unlimited design options with a vast selection of materials, shapes, colors, finishes, and applications. So really the limit here is the imagination, the flexibility, and the creativity of the designer, the contractor, the actual tile mechanic. Understanding these, once everybody has a good, solid grasp on what you can do with these, it really does become unlimited. We've seen some extremely creative designs, haven't we?
It's a design element, and it's limited by your imagination. I mean, you could try and blend it to the tile. I kind of like the other look where you actually see it and use it as an accent piece.
We're partial to that. Yeah.
So, I mean, my first metal that went in was bright brass. No one had ever seen anything like it, and we're just like, whoa, this is just incredible. It was beautiful. It was absolutely gorgeous by the time we're done, and it can be very unique. It's again limited by your imagination.
Definitely. Now, earlier the transitions that we showed were all like lower or meeting up to different things, but even transitions like this, where you're butting up to flush mount, for example, there's designs that act as a narrow, low-profile T-molding. This one over here on the right side actually is interesting because it actually has a movable joint, so that ramp can actually change depending on what's going in. So you might not know what the other floor covering coming in is exactly. This is one that could be installed that can adjust to the needs of that particular project. Again, that flexibility, that creativity, It opens things up. When sometimes our hands are constrained, and say, well, I don't know what's going in here, which means I can't specify this. Profiles like this eliminate that issue, right? This one in particular I like a lot. In the middle here, it has a little gap underneath. Carpet can be tucked under there. LVP can be tucked under there. It's a great way to marry two different materials together, and especially for, as you'll notice there, that little wheelchair icon, there's situations where you need to have ADA compliance. It needs to be accessible. Not all of them are, but most manufacturers will call that out, and it's an important thing to know, especially at the architectural commercial level. Those become very important, right? All right, so we covered the what, we covered the why and the where. Let's cover the how. Best practices, selection, preparation, and installation. So these are the different types of transitions that are available, or just a sampling, I should say, of the different types. There's transitions for flush materials. Here we've got tile to a high pile carpet. Uneven transitions where you're coming into VCT. Another one that is ADA compliant, wheelchair accessible. An important thing to consider, even residentially, right? As aging in place and accessible homes become a bigger part of the market. Edge protection on vertical corners, that's something we gotta be aware of. Change of planes with those coves. There's stair nosing, there's countertops. I've been in it long enough that I actually do remember installing 6x6 tile on countertops, finishing them off with a nice piece of wood trim on the edge, having so much grout on the countertop.
Or some of those ceramic countertop trim pieces that somehow were fashionable. And not too many years later, didn't look quite, I see this guy grinning. You know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, and I mean, I like watching them on TV sometimes to see on the, you know, the houses that have like the corners on them, and somebody spent a lot of time cutting those all in. The reality is that unless you really like spending time with bleach and a toothbrush, eventually your kitchen countertop is not going to look as beautiful as it did the day it went in.
That's true. Sometimes
with those parts, yes, absolutely. It's a lot of grout to clean.
Yeah, but nowadays, like if you go out on the show floor this week, you'll see gauge porcelain panels everywhere, 5 foot by 10 foot. Those are bigger than slabs of full stone that you can get. So countertops are back on the menu for tile. Having good ways that we can install them, protect them, and eliminate those grout joints, because sometimes you could pull out that grout joint and it was kind of like a fossil record of every meal they had cooked over the last several years. This time they had bolognese, and this time they had Alfredo, and this time they used mustard.
And this is why I love Joseph Matisse.
Now, what you'll notice here is that there's actually overlap here for a lot of these categories. You might use some of these profiles that are shown in one application, you might use them in another application. And that's fine. It's not like these are nailed down to single applications. That flexibility, again, really is part of the huge advantage that you get with profiles as a solution.
Limited by your imagination.
By my imagination. My imagination, pretty limited. Yes, ma'am.
That's okay. Drill.
That's a great question, but we're going to come up to the installation part in just a moment. This section is just about selection, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how the profiles make the installation easier too, as far as having to specify TAPCONs and all of that sort of fastening, right? Something we got to think about. So a little sneak peek for y'all going on into there. But yeah, like I said, overlap there. For example, that countertop one can also be used as a stair nosing. So just keep that in mind. Another thing that you want to think about when you're selecting is what material you're selecting. Where it's going to be going is going to be a huge part of what's going on, right?
That's correct.
So here's a nice little handy chart that's there, depending on the sort of exposure that you might find. If it's heavy commercial, obviously up there, what's acceptable is stainless steel, brass, and why? Because of the high mechanical stresses, chemical exposure.
Abrasive exposure from foot traffic, dirt, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, definitely. Even light commercial, we add in a couple other ones like aluminum, PVC, And then down in residential, it says all of the above. So just keeping in mind where things are going to go, what they're going to be subject to, what is this environment? I might be a heavy commercial environment, but it might be a wall profile that protects an outside corner. Is it going to see all the same stresses that a cove in a commercial kitchen is going to see? Likely not. So thinking that through and figuring out where are these things going to go, what are they going to be exposed to, that's going to help you not just pick that right shape like we were talking about, but also figure out what material should I be using.
I think it's like anything in life. You want to have realistic expectations of what the product is, like anything that anybody makes. Do you bring a little tiny hammer to break concrete? No, you bring a big hammer. So you just need to have those understanding and expectations, and just contact your manufacturer or your sales guy if you have questions about it. Most places are more than happy to help you select the right product.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of the points that we mentioned here is that especially in commercial applications where stainless steel is coming in, not all stainless steel is created equal. Sometimes you need a heavier duty stainless steel, depending on what cleaners might be used. For example, kitchens, they might be enzymatic cleaners. That might affect certain materials differently. Or just the simple fact of, oh, they've got steel-wheeled carts that they're rolling around all the time. We might need something a little bit beefier.
A little more robust.
A little bit more robust. But honestly, thinking about that also applies even down to the residential level where it says all of the above. An aluminum finish might be able to handle certain amounts of traffic, depending on what it is. If it's powder coated, and I'm going to put it in the primary bathroom in this house, well, what's that going to see as far as foot traffic? Socks, bare feet, damp feet, I guess. The occasional shoe if the closet's in the same room as well. But in my mud room, up north, coming in, I've got mud on my boots, grit, grease. I got my dog running in as well. That powder-coated finish might work well in the bathroom, might not work as well in that mud room. So even in those applications, something to think about. That's part of the skill of selecting these, thinking about that exposure. Size selection.
Size matters?
Size matters, unfortunately.
Okay.
Unfortunately. However,
I was told it doesn't.
last thing we want is a toe kicker, right? We don't want to catch our toes as we're walking
Exactly.
along. We don't want a profile that's this big when our tile's this big. It's a pain in the neck. So we have to select our profiles for not just the height of the tile, but the format of it and how it's going to be installed. There's different tools out there. This is a very convenient one that somebody made that you literally just slide it over your tile and it tells you what the thickness is, and that helps you pick out what size profile you need.
So you need some considerations with that, right? You have to think about the thickness of your mortar bed and any membranes that might be involved. However, you have to put some thought behind it when you select it, and picking the wrong one can be very inconvenient. So it's really worth your time and effort to make sure that you got the right one.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe even do a mock-up, even if it's nothing more than getting a sample piece and a couple pieces of material and putting them together in your hand so that you could look at it and imagine it.
Yeah, I mean, tile used to be pretty standard at 3/8 of an inch thick, and then technology advanced, and I see a lot of 5/16 tile. You might have a subway tile, about 1/4 of an inch thick, and you get a 1/4 of an inch profile for that because you don't have that much thin set to stick that, just enough to get your appropriate coverage. But maybe you're specifying and designing gauge porcelain panels. They're 5 millimeters thick, but they require a different setting method where you're actually doubling up on your thin set, which means your thin set is part of that assembly you have to account for. So the tile itself is thinner than the subway tile we mentioned before, but you might end up with a thicker profile to accommodate all of it. So all of that is part of it. And honestly, education, come to sessions like this, is a part of how you learn, okay, this is what I'm going to consider for this one. So when I'm installing these sorts of materials, if I'm not sure, I'm going to call my rep, I'm going to call the company that I'm going to purchase this from, we're going to get the right answer. Because honestly, that's the easiest way to make sure that we got success. What you don't want to be ending up with is your profile slightly below the surface, because we talked about how a big part of these are protection. If that profile is slightly below the surface, well, now we've got that exposed edge, and now we've sort of negated that point, right? So we want it to be flush, maybe even slightly above, depending on the application. So bear that in mind as well.
Absolutely.
Miss anything? All right, good. He's my boss, so I got to keep track of
I'm
him.
not his boss.
So preparation. Talk to me about prep, Jim.
Prep is the most important part of any installation. Anybody that's actually done installations will know that. Anybody that's been on job sites knows that. If you do not do your preparation, you are just going to spend your entire time struggling. It's like mixing up a bucket of thin set way too wet. You're just going to fight the entire job through. So obviously you want to go through and make sure that everything is flat. Didn't say level, right? It's flat, clean, smooth, appropriate for your materials.
And what's that saying? Flat is, or level is desired, and flat is required. There's a big difference there.
I like that. That's good.
This dude's very happy with his level.
He was very, very happy.
I'm honestly just happy he's using a level. That's something I don't see too many contractors doing. So he's winning right there already.
There's industry standards, follow them. Again, realistic expectations. If your floor goes like this and you use a profile, it's going to have to bend like that. You're going to have to accommodate to it.
Definitely. So as far as prep goes for profiles, there's not really that much that's specific to it. What's specific is you do the prep to make sure your whole installation is successful.
Exactly.
And the profiles will follow suit.
Exactly. It's not going to cure things like you see in the far pictures with the concrete moving out of plane and those kind of things. Those are other problems for another seminar someday.
Excuse me, I can't laugh too hard right now. But even those moving profiles won't adjust that. Now I can't even look at you, Jim.
You should have told me that.
So that's as far as prep, and honestly, that's all there is to say about it. Now let's talk about fitting them. Unlike tile, there is no profile stretcher. So
actually, you're wrong. You can take your profile shrinker and reverse the polarity on it. Not a lot of people know that.
Excuse me, I learned to cover my microphone that time.
Told you, don't tell me about that.
Now, a question we get a lot from designers, installation houses, contractors, even just the bucket and trowel guy that's out there is, what's the best way to cut these profiles? And the answer is the best way depends.
Correctly,
yeah.
That's the best way. And it depends really, Joseph, right on like what kind of job you're on. If you're cutting one profile, I don't think you need to bring a big, huge bandsaw out and set it up out in the yard. You could probably accomplish whatever you need with a hacksaw and a miter box. If you're on a commercial job, that's probably going to take a long time if you're making 500 cuts and profiles with a hacksaw. So you might want to up your game a little bit and get the correct tool.
Yeah, exactly. Now, he mentioned a hacksaw and a miter box. With the right blade, you can't beat that for efficiency and cost. You can set up, if you've got 20 crews of guys, you can set each of them up with a good hacksaw, a good miter box, and a file, which is really important. I'll come back to that in a moment. You can set those guys up with that for less than $30 each crew, and they can create perfect cuts. All it takes is a little bit of patience, which tile guys are known for, right? My preferred method when I was an installer, I like using a miter saw. If you do that, there's a couple things to bear in mind. You have to use a blade that's designed to cut metal. There are some out there that are designed to cut aluminum. There are actually a couple now that are designed to cut stainless steel, which me personally, I've had a couple of really good experiences with them. You don't want to be just using a wood blade. I've seen some guys say, oh yeah, just take a wood blade and flip it around backwards and it'll be okay. We're not going to say do that. Do not do that, please. We want you all to be safe. We don't want people having kickback.
Let's just talk about that for just a quick second, is the safety aspect. Whenever you're cutting these, make sure that you're doing the right thing. Make sure you're not breathing it in. Make sure that you got eye protection, ear protection if that's appropriate. So just please be careful when you're working with anybody's products.
Yeah, and honestly, even if you've got a little bit of dust containment on your power tools, it's a good idea. Metal shavings are no fun anyways.
So you got the side grinder up there, so you can just go rip at it with a side grinder, Joseph?
Yeah, we've got it called out specifically there, a variable speed angle grinder.
Why would you need variable speed?
Well, because different types of materials react differently. So one, you want to be using a cutoff wheel designed for cutting metal. You don't want to be using a diamond blade, and I'll explain that in a moment, because you'll also notice there's no wet saw on these slides. Using a variable speed angle grinder, if you're cutting aluminum, that's one thing, but if you're cutting stainless steel, you need to be using a cutoff wheel that's designed for that. But if it's going too fast, it'll actually change the color of stainless steel, it'll turn it blue. And
We can't turn it back.
no, and we don't refund for miscut profiles. So something to bear in mind, having the right tool for the right job. I mentioned you don't want to be using a diamond blade, and this is going to get a little bit into the nerdy weeds. I did mention I'm a bit of a nerd, but here's why we don't recommend you do that. Now, a lot of guys use it and they have good success with it because they get nice clean cuts and they're very happy with it. It's a tool they already set up. However, a diamond blade is made up of steel, and then at the edge it's got a softer metal that is completely embedded with diamonds. And the idea is you run it through something like stone or tile, and it wears away that metal, and it shows off new diamonds. And we even have little stones to dress those up, to clean them up even more. However, when you're cutting something like aluminum is actually softer than that metal. So what happens is that as it goes through, it actually will bind to it. And it's bound at the molecular level. You can't clean it off. You can't get it off. So you might have a cheap $60 saw blade, or you might have a really expensive $120 wet saw blade. And after 5 or 6 cuts of a profile in there, it might be toast and unfixable. So,
That's a great piece of information.
yeah, and so you don't really want to be wasting your money like that, wasting your time, especially because even if you're doing it with a grinder, actually especially with a grinder, once those are loaded up, they're a lot more prone to getting bound in the cut and kicking back. So again, best practice is to use tools that are designed for
So it sounds like it's actually cheaper to get the right tool.
Definitely cheaper to get the right tool. Cheaper, safer, faster, 100%.
I'm gonna have to call my old boss.
So we've got snips on here. If you're dealing with a plastic profile, those are really great. Those are just basic trim snips. They've got a little angle built into them. If you're in situations where the plastic profiles are specified, keep those in your back pocket and you are moving along as you're installing, especially for a lot of those ones that are designed with movement involved in them. A lot of those are made out of PVC. They're great to go as your guys are working and installing, putting them in place as they go. But that last little bit about the file, I once did a training for a group of about 30 people. The company called and said, "Oh, our guys, they're putting in profiles and they look terrible. Can you come help us out? All the cuts look bad." So, okay, so I went out there and I was doing some training. I was showing off all these different methods and the hacksaw, and I pulled out a file. And I watched 30 brains explode as soon as I put a file to a piece of metal, because none of them had ever thought about it. They never thought, oh, my cuts don't look smooth, what can I do? They just cut it, and then they just moved on. File, whether you're using bandsaw, miter saw, hacksaw, snips, angle grinder with a cutoff disc, that file's gonna help you remove those little burrs, it'll avoid any safety issues, or if you're going over some waterproofing, for example, it'll avoid damaging that as well. Small little thing, couple bucks.
It's a simple but effective tip. It really is, and it's about taking that extra time to do it right.
Yep. By the way, we are going to have some time for questions at the end of this, so get those little gray cells working on some questions to Stumble Jim, please. So let's talk about installation, the embedment, and this is what we were talking about earlier. Profiles follow this method of installation. They're designed this way. They get embedded into the thin set. Jim, this is a particular bugaboo of yours, right?
Absolutely. I spent 10 years as a consultant, and one of our primary functions was working with mall owners, doing overlays and that kind of stuff, and you would go through and evaluate the floors. And you'll start doing this, I hope, as you're walking through your local malls. When you see profiles, you'll note that there's a crack about the width of the leg running the length of it. And a lot of people go, well, that's the profile doing it. The fact of the matter is that it's not the profile. It is the lack of proper embedment of thin set. Is shown in the pictures, and unfortunately I can't really see them to tell you which one is which. You want to put thin set down, push the profile fully embedded into the thin set, and then come back and comb over it with your notches. I always would float back just a little bit, tiny little bit. You float back as much as you could reach, and that will ease that very slight incline, if there is one. But the important thing is that it's fully embedded. On the road, observing installations as they went from alleged tile installers, these guys they would just put the tile down. I don't have to do that. Look, I just pounded in. What did you do? You just pushed all the thin set away from it. You're going to get super embedment of the tile right past it because you just jammed it into the voids that you had left because you hadn't properly pressed the tile in. But what did you do? You just exposed that tile to the cracking. So to me, one of the most important things, and one of the things my former boss said when I took this job at Schluter was, can you please get the word about embedment out, Jim? Just if you can do that, I'll be happy. So here it is. It's so important to do that part correctly. And if you do that a few times, while you're doing it and you think about it, it will become crystal clear, I promise, why you need to do it, and then you'll start to understand why some of those malls that you go to in airports have that ugly little crack right up against the middle profiles.
Yeah, shoving them doesn't work.
End of my rant.
But mission accomplished. His old boss told him, get the word out there. Here we are. You know?
Yeah, it only took 10 years. So.
Alrighty. So, a couple precautions that we want to mention when it comes to best practices. First one, as you're working, clean those profiles immediately. Depending on what sort of material, what sort of finishes you're working with, cement's very caustic, and it's also a mechanical thing. It's not just chemically caustic. It wants to grab in, it wants to grow, so it can actually etch finishes if it's left to dry. So just clean up as they go.
Can I tell you about Uncle Jim's #1 rule of cement right now?
Please.
Always clean your cement when it's wet, guys, because when it's dry, you need a hammer and chisel. Just
And that is true.
kind of cement 101 right there for you.
That is true. I guilty. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but bears repeating. Just because there's a finish that is approved for floor traffic does not mean it's appropriate for all floor traffic. Coming into the World Congress Center here, this is going to see tens, hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people walking through every year. Mrs. Jones' bathroom is probably going to see 2 people walking through every day, twice a day for the rest of their lives, right?
Yeah, not after they get old, trust me.
Shuffling, maybe?
Like 6 times a day.
And then the last thing is set expectations with your customers about color consistency. We all love to promise that this is exactly how it's going to look based on this little 2-inch sample that I've got here for you, and they're just going to be locked into that forever. The reality of things is, even in manufacturing processes, if it's powder coating, if it's anodization, even something as minute as a few microns can drastically change the way that light bounces off, which means that the color, while the same color, might look a little bit different.
The reflective color
Yeah.
can easily change.
So communication up front, setting those expectations. If I know there's some variation as I go into my project and then my contractor finishes up and I go in, I say, oh, the one on this side looks a little bit lighter than that one. That's about right. That's what he told me to expect, but it's within that range. Perfect. But if I was promised 100%, this is the Pantone color that it is going to be 100% of the time, and I go in there with my Pantone chart and say, oh no, Bill's not getting his check.
Well, it's managing expectations. I would also throw out there, as again, a recovering tile installer, lighting is not always available, right? So you want to make sure that critical things like that you're viewing them in a similar light as the room is going to get, just like your tile, just like anything else. It's just really important, and maybe even do a mock-up so that everybody has expectations. The mock-up doesn't have to be installed. The mock-up could just be, laying things down on the floor and stepping back a little bit, using a reasonable viewing distance with the correct light, get the customer in there to take a look at it, and having that conversation about die lots, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Communication, it's pretty basic. So, let's talk about the future. We've covered the what, the where.
Well, hey, can we go back just a second
sure.
there and talk a little bit about cleaning again? During the installation, the importance of making sure that everything is clean from the profiles.
Oh, yeah.
The stainless steel are a little bit more robust. They can stand a little more abuse. Same with the plastics. Anodized products, any anodized product, if you put a caustic material against it, it's going to etch it and create a problem. Just for the record, thin set water, grout water, as it runs down the wall, is caustic. So just make sure that whoever's doing it cleans it up reasonably quickly. I mean, it doesn't have to be that second, but within a couple of minutes. Otherwise, it's going to create a problem.
Yeah. And actually, in line with that, I forgot to mention earlier, talking about setting expectations with your customers, talk to them about what they'll be cleaning with as well. I did once have a customer who decided to clean their shower with oven cleaner. Do not know why.
So you're saying not do that?
I would say that the look of their metal was leopard-like.
I got to make a quick phone call to the wife.
So the tile industry standard is a pH neutral cleaner. You can't do better than that. But just, again, communicating those things to them, that way they just understand what's going on. Everybody's going to be a lot happier as you go. All right, so let's talk about the future now. We've covered the who, what, when, where, why, the how. Let's talk about the future. Setting the standard. The NTCA is really driving a lot of the work to develop standards. Currently, there are no industry standards for production or installation of profiles, but it's something that's necessary, especially as they become more and more popular. We see them everywhere. We're seeing them more, and anybody in here who designs or specifies, it's becoming just a common part of your practice, right? Oh, I've got the metals here. I'm going to show you this is what we'll do. It's simple, it's fast, and has all those benefits that we spoke about. Excellent question, Dan. The NTCA is the National Tile Contractors Association. It's one of the three big industry groups. It represents non-union labor in terms of representing labor's interests in events like this, as well as the overall trade. They have a book here called the NTCA Reference Manual, and that's a document that's aimed primarily at contractors, but really is useful for everybody that's involved that specifies tile or designs it, or general contractors, anything like that.
That last point's great. While it is written for the installer, all of the information is something that design professionals, anybody in the industry is going to benefit from having in their back pocket, and it's one of the many great services that the NTCA provides. So if you guys aren't members, please consider joining.
Yeah, please do. It's a great organization. And again, not just for contractors either. This is actually a companion to it. So the handbook is from the Tile Council of North America, that's the TCNA. That has all the methods that are industry approved, as well as a ton of great information. That sort of in conjunction with the NTCA reference manual will put any contractor, honestly, a huge way above most of their peers.
One way maybe to look at it is the handbook is what tells you how to do everything. The reference manual you can use if you didn't read the handbook, and that'll tell you how to take care of the problems that were created by not following the basic instructions.
100%.
As a consultant, people would say, what does that mean? What does that mean you did, Jim? And my answer always was, I fly around the country reading the bag to people, right? They'd say, well, what happened here? What happened? I go, see where it says not to do that? And they'd go, yeah. So, well, you shouldn't have done that. and so just really read the directions, guys. This is a guy saying that. Read the directions.
Yeah, exactly.
Follow the industry standards. They're there for a reason. There's a lot of very smart people that are in the industry, that are passionate about it, and they're designing these standards not for us, the manufacturers. They're designing them for the installers. They're designing for everybody. They get together. They come to a consensus. Thank you very much. Okay, we've actually made it almost to an hour.
Almost, yeah. So he's mentioning all these different groups, all these industry groups. I mentioned NTCA is driving the work. But here's a great little graphic that shows you it's not just NTCA. There's National Tile Contractors Association. There's the Tile Council of North America. ANSI, which is the Standards Institute. They are also an organization that works hard on these as well. And the MMSA, those are actually the manufacturers developing ways to test all these products so that we know exactly that these minimum standards ensure a safe product for everybody. They all work together in conjunction to develop these standards. It's kind of like a brain trust. Yesterday, we were in meetings for how long?
10 hours. It was a long day.
It was a very long day.
To me, one of the best parts about all these groups is that, I mean, we're competitors out in the field, but when we meet in these groups, it's all of us coming together with a consensus that, okay, this is what's good for our industry.
Yeah.
So, pay attention to what they're putting out there, guys. It's for everybody.
Yeah, and you can get a lot of information out on the show floor sometime this week. Definitely worth a visit. So, last point we'll make. Standards are still in development. It's a slow and deliberate process because we want to make sure that when these standards come out, they're strong, they're safe, and they protect everybody involved. That's what we want. So, in the meantime, while you're specifying projects, designing, if you're curious about things, if you're not sure, if this is a whole new product category to you and you need to know how to design them, best way to start, call your manufacturer rep. All of them are always happy to give you information, to come give you trainings, because, again, we want to make sure everybody has the highest chance of success as possible using these products. So, we've got a few minutes. Do the gray cells work? Did anybody have any questions for Jim?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Donahue.
We're seeing an advancement in consumption with 2CM pavers. I know you guys have designed a wonderful pedestal system. I know you've got some edge profiles that have a tall leg that accommodate that. However, what we're seeing is the exterior containment requirement, right? Where we typically have like a parapet. There's a demand for metal trim there that is not satisfied that I've seen from your company, and I just want to know, are you guys working on that? Currently, people are going out to other metal trim manufacturers outside of our industry. Does Schluter have that in the works?
I'm not 100% sure, I'll be honest. That's above my pay grade. I don't think that we do right this very minute, though. I will pass that along that we should.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're seeing an increased demand for it.
Right. We got a lot of stuff going on, and I know my R&D guy will shoot me in the head when I tell him that one.
Yeah, honestly, talking with the profile guys up at our headquarters, I will tell you that they have a long list of things they're working on, and I would be shocked if that wasn't one of them, honestly. So, anybody else? Any more questions? Still got a few minutes.
If you think of any later on, Joseph will be working the show at our booth.
Yep. I will not be wearing this suit because it'll be too hot. So, are we about done, Ms. Dot? Oh, looks like somebody left maybe some AirPods. So, anybody lose some AirPods? Oh, maybe right here. We'll find out. All right, well, oh yes, please. No, not at all. Yeah. That's a great question. So one of the benefits of having all these standards for these materials is that even thinset has standard ranges for how thick it can be and how thick it needs to be. So again, depending on the installation method, and this is where being in communication with your rep as well as your qualified installer, hopefully, they'll be able to determine pretty much what that thickness is going to be. For example, most thinset has a range of between 3/32 of an inch minimum up to a 1/2 inch maximum, most of them. Some have a little bit higher maximum, some have a little bit lower. So that's one of those when those RFIs, when you send out those RFIs, talking about the method as well as which material, and that'll help you find out what the limitations are and what the projected thicknesses
Well,
will be.
in determining the method that the particular installation, I guess you guys specify design, by understanding the various methods that go in beyond just the look of it on top, by understanding that should direct you to a certain extent of what's appropriate for your particular application.
Collaboration, basically.
Collaboration.
Mr. Weber?
Get the handbook, seriously. There's stuff in there that is just very helpful.
Yes, sir.
I just want to add from the design standpoint, you want to be specifying the actual profile. Don't get into the weeds with the size. size can be determined in the field by the installer and by the subcontractor. Many times, based on the type of application it is, that number is going to vary in terms of the size. But if you specify the actual profile, they can determine in the field.
That's some great insight. Kurt is one of our commercial guys that has a significant amount of experience in that. So, yeah.
Great questions. Unfortunately, that's all the time for questions that we have. So thank you all so
We're
much
out.
for coming out. And
Thank you very,
we'll see
very
you out on
much
the
for
show
coming
floor.
out this early. Great audience.